The galaxy was alive with excitement. The Great Peace Summit was about to begin. Every corner of the universe had sent their representatives to this event. It was a rare occasion where so many different species could meet under one roof and discuss the future. The summit would decide important things like trade, alliances, and technology sharing. It could change the fate of entire galaxies. At the heart of the summit was the Zorathian Empire. The Zorathians were an ancient race, known for their incredible military strength and advanced technology. Their ambassador, Tarashk, stood proudly at the center of the summit hall, his eyes scanning the other delegates. He had seen countless peace talks before, and this one would be no different. The Zorathians were respected by everyone, feared by many, and admired for their wisdom. Tarashk adjusted his uniform, a dark blue fabric with silver designs that shimmered in the light. His posture was perfect, tall and straight, with an air of authority that made the other ambassadors step back when he entered a room. His people were always in control, and he had no doubt this summit would be no exception. The ambassadors from the Typherians, a race of highly intelligent, telepathic beings, sat near the front. They were known for their peaceful nature, always looking for solutions through diplomacy rather than conflict. The Ultraxians, tall, muscular beings covered in dark green scales, sat off to the side, their eyes always watching and calculating. The Trionians, a group of insect-like creatures with multiple limbs, exchanged quiet words in their native language. And of course, the humans, newcomers to the galactic stage, sat at the back, their small but determined representative, Admiral Tyler, barely a blip on the radar of the powerful, long-standing species in the room. Tarashk couldn't help but glance at the humans with a mix of curiosity and mild amusement. Humans had only recently made their first contact with the galaxy. Their technology was still in its early stages compared to the ancient civilizations around them. Yet, they were ambitious, stubborn, and had managed to hold their own in small skirmishes here and there. Still, they were not a threat, and Tarashk didn't take them seriously. As the delegates took their seats and the meeting began, the topic of discussion quickly moved to the future of the galaxy. Trade routes, peacekeeping efforts, and military alliances were all on the table. The Zorathians had always been the leaders in such discussions. Tarashk felt confident that his people would guide the summit towards agreements that favored the Zorathians. After all, who could challenge the power of the Zorathian Empire? The human representative, Admiral Tyler, listened quietly at the back of the room. He had dark brown hair, a neatly trimmed beard, and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Despite his calm demeanor, there was a quiet strength in his presence. He had been sent to represent humanity's interests, but even he knew that humans were still considered newcomers in this vast, ancient galaxy. Tyler's eyes occasionally flicked toward Tarashk, but he didn't seem to be intimidated by the Zorathian ambassador's presence. There was no fear in the human's gaze. It was as if he didn't fully understand the power dynamics in the room. But that was the thing about humans. They were unpredictable. They didn't always play by the rules. They weren't always the biggest, the smartest, or the strongest, but they had something else, a quiet resilience, a will to push forward even when everything seemed impossible. As Tarashk listened to the other ambassadors speak, he found his mind drifting toward thoughts of the humans. They had been invited to the summit not because of their power, but because they were starting to make waves in the galaxy. They were beginning to prove that even a species with limited resources could still carve out a place for themselves in the grand scheme of things. But Tarashk quickly pushed the thought aside. The galaxy was full of species like that, small, eager to prove themselves. The Zorathians had seen it all before. Empires rose and fell. Smaller species tried to challenge the larger ones, only to be crushed under the weight of their own ambition. There was nothing special about the humans. At least, not yet. The summit continued as planned, with each species presenting their proposals and ideas. But as the hours passed, the tension in the room grew. A sense of anticipation hung in the air. Everyone knew something big was coming. The humans, although quiet, were not backing down. They weren't saying much, but their presence was felt. Their fleet was on its way to the summit, but it was still a long way off. For now, it was just a matter of waiting. Tarashk could feel the weight of the summit pressing down on him. He had to make sure the Zorathians remained in control. There was too much at stake. The peace of the galaxy depended on it. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Something about the humans, about this summit, felt different. He had no idea how right he was. As the meeting continued, the ambassadors prepared for the next part of the summit. But in the back of his mind, Tarashk couldn't help but wonder, could the humans truly be underestimated? Or was the galaxy about to experience something it had never seen before? The atmosphere in the summit hall had been tense, but nothing compared to the sudden shift that came when the news arrived. The humans were nearing. The announcement echoed through the room, breaking the quiet hum of conversations. Representatives from every species stopped talking, and their eyes turned toward the large holographic screen at the front of the hall. Tarashk, the Zorathian ambassador, straightened his posture. He had expected this. The humans, after all, were invited to the summit. But what surprised him was the urgency and the tone of the announcement. The humans were not arriving alone. They were coming with an enormous fleet. The room fell silent, except for the soft clicks and beeps of the summit's technology. Every ambassador sat still, waiting for the first visual confirmation of the human fleet. Tarashk's hands rested on the table, fingers tapping nervously, though he would never admit it. He had seen fleets before. The Zorathian Empire controlled vast swaths of space, and their military was unmatched. The idea that a young species like humans could pose a threat seemed laughable to him. Yet there was something in the air now, something that told him this wasn't just another fleet. Prepare for the incoming transmission. The voice of the summit's coordinator echoed through the room. A flicker appeared on the holographic screen. A distant image began to take shape. At first, it was just a few small dots against the blackness of space. The human fleet. Tarashk leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. The dots slowly grew in size, but it wasn't their size that caught his attention. It was the way they moved. The fleet was organized, moving in perfect formation, a sign of military precision. The other ambassadors exchanged glances, murmurs of confusion spreading across the room. The Kypherians looked puzzled, the Ultraxians shifted uneasily, and even the normally stoic Trionians seemed intrigued. The fleet was massive, larger than any one species had a right to command. But there was something about it that felt different, something that didn't fit. "Prepare to send a greeting," another voice called out. Tarashk frowned. He had expected this moment to be uneventful, but now his mind raced. He had expected the humans to show up with a few small ships. But this was something entirely unexpected. He couldn't help but feel a nagging discomfort deep in his chest. The transmission finally cleared, and a sharp image of the fleet appeared on the screen. The human ships were huge, towering over the smaller ships of the other species. The ships were unlike anything Tarashk had ever seen. They were not sleek and graceful like Zorathian warships. Instead, they were bulky, rugged, and built for war. The designs were strange, with enormous cannons mounted on the sides, shields that glowed with an energy the likes of which no one in the galaxy had ever encountered. "Let's see what we're dealing with," Tarashk muttered under his breath. He pressed a button, and the feed switched to show the human fleet's leader, Admiral Tyler. The human appeared on the screen, standing in front of a flag that bore the symbol of humanity. His face was calm, but there was a hardness in his eyes that made even Tarashk pause. The human spoke in a clear, confident voice that echoed through the room. "We come in peace," Admiral Tyler said. "We seek to join in the discussions and share our knowledge and resources. But know this, we are not to be underestimated." The words seemed simple enough, but the tone behind them sent a chill through the room. The humans were not asking for permission. They were declaring their presence. Tarashk had to admit there was something unsettling about the calm authority in the human's voice, something that didn't quite match the usual political pleasantries one might expect in a peace summit. The screen shifted, and for a moment, Tarashk thought he saw something in the background of the transmission. He leaned forward, squinting. It was a massive dreadnought, looming over the fleet. The ship was so large that it made the other ships look like toys in comparison. There were other ships as well, all of them armed with weapons that no one in the room had ever seen before. The sheer firepower was terrifying. The dreadnought alone could likely take out half the galaxy's fleets without breaking a sweat. For the first time in a long while, Tarashk felt something unfamiliar, a sense of doubt. Could the humans really be this strong? How had they managed to build such a fleet? What kind of resources did they have? And why had no one realized the potential threat they posed? The other ambassadors were equally silent, their faces reflecting shock and confusion. The Typherians' usual calm demeanor faltered, and the Ultraxians, normally so proud of their own strength, shifted nervously in their seats. The Trionians seemed to hesitate before they spoke among themselves. No one had expected this. Tarashk's thoughts were racing. The humans were no longer just a small species trying to make their mark. They had arrived with a fleet that could challenge the might of any empire. And now, they were sitting here, calm and confident, as though they had always been meant to be at the center of this galaxy. For the first time, Tarashk couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change, and he didn't know if he was ready for it. The silence in the summit hall was deafening. Every ambassador was glued to the screens, watching as the human fleet continued to approach the peace summit. The vast expanse of space stretched out behind them, but it was the human ships that filled the room with an uneasy energy. The holograms flickered as the ships moved closer, their massive forms now clearly visible. Tarashk sat at the front of the room, his sharp eyes never leaving the image of the fleet. The human ships were unlike anything he had ever seen. Most fleets had sleek, advanced designs meant to reflect the pride of their species. But the human fleet, it was different. These ships were not beautiful. They were bulky and imposing, designed not for elegance, but for sheer strength. They were built for war, and Tarashk could not shake the feeling that there was more to these ships than he could understand. The other ambassadors sat in stunned silence, exchanging nervous glances. The Trionians, who were known for their keen sense of strategy, began whispering to each other. The Ultraxians, so confident in their own might, shifted uneasily in their seats. Even the normally composed Typherians seemed unsettled, their calm demeanor cracking. They had all underestimated the humans, and now they were realizing how wrong they had been. Tarashk narrowed his eyes as he studied the ships. There were dozens of them, each one more imposing than the last, and they weren't just big, they were organized, perfectly lined up, moving as if controlled by a single mind. Every ship was in its place, with no signs of chaos or disorder. It was as if the human fleet was a living thing, breathing together as one. "They're too organized for such a young species," whispered a Cypherian delegate. Tarashk turned to look at the Typherian, who was clearly troubled by the sight. He had been too quick to dismiss the humans. Their fleet wasn't just a symbol of their strength, it was a sign of something else. A sign that they were more than just a species trying to catch up with the rest of the galaxy. Tarashk looked back at the screen, his heart beating faster than usual. It wasn't just the size of the fleet that unsettled him. It was the way they moved. There was a certain calm about it, a certainty that made Tarashk wonder if the humans had known this moment would come for years. Were they prepared for something bigger than they had let on? Was the human fleet a show of force? Or was it something more strategic, something they had planned carefully for a long time? The fleet slowly grew larger on the screen. A dull hum filled the room as the energy in the summit hall grew thicker with every passing moment. The human ships were now close enough that the ambassadors could see the details. Enormous weapon systems, shields that shimmered with energy, and the unmistakable markings of a military force that had been carefully built for a singular purpose. Tarashk had seen fleets from the greatest powers in the galaxy, but this was different. This was not the work of a species playing catch-up. The screens flickered again, and now Tarash could see the ships even more clearly. The scale of the fleet was mind-blowing. There were ships the size of entire cities, equipped with weapons so powerful that Tarash felt a twinge of fear in his chest. For a moment, he almost couldn't believe what he was seeing. How had the humans built such an enormous force? And more importantly, why had no one noticed it before? There's something strange about their energy signatures, came the voice of a Traionian ambassador. Tarash turned his gaze back to the screen, focusing on the flickering lights surrounding the ships. The energy signatures were different from anything he had ever encountered. They were strong, yes, but there was a pattern to them, something that didn't quite fit with the technology the humans were supposed to possess. It was almost as if the humans had found a way to manipulate energy in a way no one had thought possible. A slight tremor ran through the room as a human ship drew closer. The ambassador's voice echoed across the room once more. "We are here," Admiral Tyler's calm voice said. "We come in peace, but make no mistake. We are a force to be reckoned with." The words hit like a hammer. The other ambassadors exchanged uneasy glances, trying to hide their growing sense of fear. For all the power and pride the other species held, they all now understood one undeniable truth. The humans were no longer to be underestimated. Their fleet wasn't just large, it was something that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. Tarash's mind raced. He had spent years learning about the galactic powers. He had studied every species, their strengths, weaknesses, their technologies. But this was different. He had never seen a fleet like this before. And that was what terrified him the most. The humans had arrived, and they weren't just showing up to join the conversation. They were here to lead it. As the human ships moved ever closer, Tarash felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Doubt. The galaxy had always been divided between the strong and the weak, the old and the new. But the humans, they were something new entirely. Something powerful. Something he didn't understand. For the first time in his life, Tarash wondered if the Zorathians might not be the most powerful species in the galaxy anymore. The human fleet continued to approach, but there was something different now. The entire summit hall felt heavier, as if the very air had thickened with an invisible weight. Tarash could feel it pressing down on him, making his usual calm composure waver just slightly. He wasn't alone. He could see the same unease reflected on the faces of the other ambassadors. Their earlier doubts about the human fleet had grown into something more. It was no longer just a matter of size or power. Now there was a real fear, a fear that Tarash didn't fully understand yet, but could feel in his bones. The human ships loomed on the holographic screens, their massive forms filling the space. The energy surrounding them was unlike anything the galaxy's greatest minds had encountered. The ships pulsed with strange, almost otherworldly power. Their shields shimmered in a way that made Tarash question the very laws of physics. Then, as if on cue, a transmission cut through the tension. It was a message from the human fleet. Admiral Tyler appeared once again on the screen, his calm face betraying no emotion. But there was something in his eyes, something that told Tarash this was no ordinary conversation. This wasn't just a greeting. "We've been hiding something," Admiral Tyler's voice rang out, clear and cold. "And now it's time you knew the truth." The room fell silent. Every ambassador turned their attention fully to the screen, the words hanging in the air like a thick fog. Tarash leaned forward, his mind racing. What could the humans possibly be hiding? Had they been lying about their technology, their intentions? For a moment, doubt clouded his thoughts. Had the Zorathians miscalculated everything? Had they underestimated the humans even more than they realized? Admiral Tyler continued, his voice steady but firm. "The fleet you see before you is not just a show of strength. It is not just a display of military might. It is the result of years of research, of hidden knowledge that we uncovered in the deepest corners of the galaxy." Tarash's eyes narrowed. Hidden knowledge. The humans had only been part of the galactic community for a short time. How could they have possibly uncovered something so powerful in such a short period? Long before humanity made contact with the rest of the galaxy, we stumbled upon something, Tyler went on. A long-forgotten species, an ancient race. They were wiped out by forces beyond their control, but their knowledge remained, hidden in the ruins of their once great civilization. The ambassadors exchanged confused glances. The idea that humanity had uncovered some ancient, unknown race was troubling. The galaxy was filled with secrets, but for a species so young, how could they have found something so powerful? We found their technology, Admiral Tyler continued. The energy sources, the weapons, the designs, it was all there, buried beneath the dust of an ancient world. And we learned to use it. Tarashk's breath caught in his chest. He had heard of ancient races before, beings so powerful that their civilizations had shaped the galaxy in unimaginable ways. But they were always just stories, myths passed down over millennia. Yet here the humans were, revealing that they had discovered one of these lost races, and not only that, they had learned to harness their technology. How could you possibly have understood such advanced technology? A Sci-Fi ambassador asked, his voice trembling. No species has ever been able to reverse engineer such ancient power. Admiral Tyler's eyes glinted, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. You're right. No one has. But we did. A wave of disbelief swept over the room. The humans had done what no other species had ever managed to do. They had taken something beyond their understanding and turned it into a weapon. A weapon that was now standing before the galaxy, ready to change everything. You've been hiding this from us, an Iltraxian ambassador asked, his voice a mix of anger and fear. For how long? We've been preparing, Tyler said, his tone now serious. We knew that one day the galaxy would change. We knew that one day this knowledge would be the key to our survival. We didn't reveal it because we weren't sure the galaxy was ready. We weren't sure if you were ready. The silence that followed was suffocating. Every ambassador in the room now understood the truth. The humans weren't just a small, inexperienced species trying to find their place in the galaxy. They had something no one else had. They had knowledge, technology, and power that no one had expected. And now, the rest of the galaxy would have to face the consequences of underestimating them. Tarashk felt his mind racing. The Zorathians had always been the masters of war, the rulers of the galaxy's military might. They had faced enemies and emerged victorious. But now, for the first time in centuries, Tarashk wasn't so sure. The humans had shown them something that couldn't be ignored. They had found the secrets of an ancient race, and they were wielding that power with ease. For the first time, Tarashk realized something terrifying. The balance of power in the galaxy had just shifted, and the Zorathians were no longer the top dogs. Admiral Tyler's final words echoed in Tarashk's mind. We are no longer just a part of this galaxy. We are its future. And for the first time in his life, Tarashk wasn't so sure he wanted to know what that future would look like. The summit hall buzzed with whispers. The truth had been revealed, and the galaxy's most powerful ambassadors were still trying to process what they had just learned. The human fleet, once seen as a curious addition to the Peace Summit, was now viewed with suspicion and fear. The ancient technology, the hidden power. They had never expected this. No one had. Tarashk, still in disbelief, sat at the front of the room. His eyes were fixed on the screen in front of him, showing the human fleet as it approached the planet. He could feel the unease in the air. The once solid foundation of the galaxy's balance of power had been shaken, and no one knew what to expect next. But one thing was certain. The humans were here, and they were not going away. We need to make contact, the Trionian ambassador muttered, his voice full of tension. Before things get worse. Tarashk agreed. They had to find out what the humans truly wanted. But there was something about the way Admiral Tyler spoke, so calm, so assured, that made Tarashk uneasy. It was as if the humans had been waiting for this moment their entire lives. They didn't come to negotiate. They came to take their place in the galaxy. The summit hall went quiet as the human fleet's flagship came into view. A massive, imposing ship, the size of a small moon. It floated with eerie silence, its black hull shimmering in the distant light of the sun. The dreadnought was a symbol of humanity's strength, and it seemed to demand respect. Suddenly, a signal beeped. The human fleet was sending another transmission. Everyone turned their attention to the screen. "This is Admiral Tyler." The human's voice rang out, clear and firm. "We are ready to meet with your representatives. But make no mistake, we come on our terms. If you want peace, you will meet us face to face." There was a long pause, as if the room was holding its breath. The Trionian, Cypherian, and Iltraxian ambassadors all exchanged uneasy glances. Tarash could see the doubt in their eyes. They had been underestimating the humans, and now it was too late to turn back. Tarash took a deep breath and stood. "We must meet with them," he said, his voice firm. The others reluctantly nodded. The time for negotiations had passed. It was time for action. Minutes later, Tarash found himself aboard a Zorathian transport ship, heading toward the human fleet. The air was thick with tension, and the quiet hum of the ship seemed to amplify the nervous energy that filled the cabin. The other ambassadors were seated in front of him, their faces pale, their eyes filled with uncertainty. They, too, had never experienced anything like this. The transport ship finally docked with the human flagship. Tarash's stomach tightened as the door opened, revealing a stark, metallic hallway. The Zorathians, Trionians, Cypherians, and Iltraxians made their way down the narrow passage, their steps echoing loudly. No one spoke, each of them lost in their own thoughts, trying to prepare for what lay ahead. At the end of the hall, the doors opened into a large, sterile room. It was cold, clinical, yet strangely intimidating. In the center of the room stood Admiral Tyler, flanked by several human officers. His eyes met theirs, and for a brief moment, Tarash felt a chill run down his spine. The human leader stood tall, radiating confidence. His posture was perfect, as if he knew he was already in control of the situation. "Welcome," Admiral Tyler said, his voice smooth and calm, though there was an undeniable edge to it. "I trust the journey here was pleasant." No one responded immediately. The tension was so thick that it felt impossible to speak. Finally, Tarash cleared his throat and stepped forward. "We are here to understand what you truly want." "Admiral," he said, his voice steady despite the nervous energy racing through his veins. "We need to know why you have brought such a powerful fleet to this peace summit." Admiral Tyler's lips twitched into a small smile. "I think you already know the answer to that question," he said, his tone almost mocking. "But I'll tell you anyway. We came because we are done waiting. Humanity has spent too long on the sidelines of galactic politics. Now we are stepping forward. We are ready to lead." Tarash's heart skipped a beat. "Lead," he repeated, his voice rising. "You are too young to lead anything. You don't know the first thing about galactic politics." Admiral Tyler's smile didn't fade. "We don't need to know the old ways. We have something far more important than knowledge of the old systems. We have the strength to reshape the future. And that future, my friends, includes us as its leaders." The room fell into stunned silence. The ambassadors from the other species stood frozen, processing the weight of his words. For centuries, the galaxy had been ruled by the old empires, the long-established powers. The Zorathians, the Trionians, the Typherians, they had all shared control of the galaxy in one way or another. But now, humans were claiming a place at the top. Tarash's mind raced. The humans didn't just want to survive. They wanted to change everything. They wanted to rule, and they had the power to do it. Admiral Tyler's eyes locked onto Tarash's, and for a brief moment, there was a flicker of something. Danger, perhaps, or maybe just the cold reality of what was to come. "The first step is simple," Admiral Tyler continued. "You either accept us as equals, or you stand in our way. Choose wisely." The room was silent again. Thrash could feel the weight of the decision before them. The galaxy's future was being rewritten, and the humans were no longer asking for a place. They were taking it. The room was suffocating. Thrash could feel the sweat starting to bead on his forehead, his palms clammy. The other ambassadors stood motionless, as if frozen by the sheer weight of the words spoken by Admiral Tyler. He had laid it all out. Humanity wasn't just here for peace or cooperation. They weren't seeking allies or power through diplomacy. The humans had come to take control. "Choose wisely," Admiral Tyler had said, his voice cold and unyielding. "Either accept us as equals or stand in our way." Tarashk's mind raced. He had never seen a species so bold, so sure of itself. Humans had always been seen as small, young, and disorganized. But now, the galaxy's most powerful species, the ancient powers, were faced with a truth they could hardly believe. Humanity had the strength, the knowledge, and the will to dominate. The other ambassadors stood silently, still processing Tyler's words. Even the normally stoic Traionian ambassador, known for his unshakable confidence, seemed lost. The Iltraxian and Cypherian ambassadors exchanged anxious glances, and for the first time in a long while, fear began to ripple through the room. Finally, Tarashk spoke. "We cannot accept your offer. The balance of power in the galaxy has stood for centuries. You cannot simply change it overnight." His voice was firm, but even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the growing doubt in his mind. Was he truly standing in the way of something unstoppable? Admiral Tyler didn't flinch. His gaze remained steady, unwavering. "We've been waiting for this moment, and we're not here to negotiate or to wait any longer. You have two choices: accept us as equals or face the consequences." The silence in the room deepened. The ambassadors looked around at each other, their faces filled with uncertainty. Tarashk knew that whatever decision they made, it would change everything. But what could they do? They couldn't just bow to the humans. They couldn't let this new power dictate the galaxy's future. The old powers, his own people, the Zorathians, had worked for centuries to build their place at the top of the galaxy's hierarchy. How could they just give that up? But deep down, Tarashk knew that the humans were not bluffing. He had seen it in their eyes, in the cold, calculating way they spoke. They had the power to back up their words, the energy signatures from their fleet, the strange, ancient technology. They had it all, and they were ready to use it. The tension in the room was unbearable. It felt as if the entire galaxy was holding its breath. If they refused the humans' offer, the consequences would be catastrophic. But if they accepted, they would be ceding control to a species that had only just begun to explore the galaxy. Tarashk's heart pounded. He could feel the eyes of the other ambassadors on him, waiting for him to make the first move. He was the one who had always stood at the forefront of Zorathian power. He was the one who had led the charge in every battle, every negotiation. But now, for the first time, he was unsure. Admiral Tyler stood perfectly still, watching them all. He knew they were in a bind. He knew they had no real choice. And that, more than anything, made the humans dangerous. "We don't need to rule the galaxy the way you do," Tyler said, breaking the silence. "We don't need centuries of history to justify our place. We just need the future. And that future starts today." Tarashk felt his heart skip a beat. The humans were not like the other species. They didn't care for tradition or the old ways. They weren't interested in the long histories of empire building. They were driven by something else, a hunger for power, a desire to change the galaxy in their own image. And that made them more dangerous than anything Tarashk had ever faced. The other ambassadors shifted uncomfortably. The room felt colder now, as if the air itself was rejecting the tension. But still, no one spoke. Every eye was on Tarashk, waiting for him to make the decision. Finally, he stepped forward. He had to do it. He had to make a choice, for better or worse. He couldn't stand here forever, caught between the old ways and the new. His people, The Zorethians had always been the most powerful military force in the galaxy, but now the humans were showing them what true power really meant. Power wasn't just about strength. It was about knowledge, technology, and the will to take what you wanted. "We will not surrender," Tarash said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "The Zorethians will never accept your leadership." Admiral Tyler's gaze didn't waver. He nodded, as if he had been expecting this answer all along. "You're making a mistake," he said softly. "But we've been prepared for this." He turned to one of his officers, who stepped forward and activated a series of holographic displays. The room fell silent as images of the human fleet appeared, showing off their massive weapon systems, their unmatched military might. Tarash's breath caught in his throat as the hologram shifted. It wasn't just the ships. The humans had something far worse, something that no one had expected. It was a weapon, a device that could wipe out entire fleets in an instant, a weapon unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. "This is the moment of truth," Tyler said, his voice quiet but filled with certainty. "We didn't want to use it, but we will, if we have to." The room was silent. The truth had been revealed. The humans had come to reshape the galaxy. And now, it was too late to stop them. The room was still. The ambassadors stood in stunned silence, their minds struggling to comprehend the weight of what they had just witnessed. The holographic display of the weapon hovered in the air, casting an eerie glow over the room. Humanity had shown them what they were capable of, something more powerful than anyone had ever imagined. It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. Admiral Tyler's gaze swept across the room, locking eyes with each ambassador in turn. He knew that they were all feeling the same thing, a deep, unsettling fear. This was no longer about negotiations or diplomacy. The humans had made it clear they had come to dominate. And if the galaxy's leaders didn't accept that, they would be crushed. "We have waited for this moment," Tyler said, his voice steady and cold. "For too long, we have been sidelined, dismissed as nothing more than children playing at the big table. But no longer. This is the beginning of a new era, and humanity will lead it." Tarash's heart pounded in his chest. He had never felt so helpless. The Zorethians, the Trionians, the Typherians, all the ancient powers of the galaxy had been reduced to nothing in an instant. The human fleet, with its ancient technology and overwhelming might, had shown them the true meaning of power. They had no way to fight back. The other ambassadors were silent, their faces pale. They exchanged uneasy glances, but none of them spoke. It was clear that the humans had won. There was no room for negotiation. They would either accept humanity's leadership, or they would face destruction. "Do you understand now?" Admiral Tyler continued, his tone unyielding. "This isn't just about war. This is about the future. We don't need to conquer you. We don't need to take what's already yours. We are here to build something new. And you can be a part of that future, or you can stand in the way. But make no mistake, we will move forward with or without you." Tarash took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He had never felt so cornered in his entire life. The Zorethians were strong, their fleets unmatched in power. But what good was strength if it couldn't protect them from the unimaginable? What good was their history if it meant nothing in the face of this new force? We cannot accept this," he said, his voice faltering. "You cannot just change everything. The balance of the galaxy. The balance is broken." Tyler interrupted, his voice sharp. "It was never meant to last. The old powers are fading, and you know it. You may think that you can hold on to what was, but it's already slipping away. Humanity is the future, and we're not asking for your permission." The room was silent again. No one knew what to say. How could they argue with someone who had such power, such certainty? The humans were not like any species they had ever encountered. They didn't fight for land or resources. They fought for something bigger, a future they had already decided was theirs. Admiral Tyler looked at the ambassadors, his eyes cold and calculating. "Your time is over," he said softly. "The new era is here, and humanity will lead it. You can choose to stand with us, or you can be left behind. The choice is yours." Tarashk felt his mind spinning. He had spent his entire life fighting for his people, for his empire. But now, it seemed as if everything he had worked for was worthless. The Zorethian fleets, the ancient alliances, they all felt like relics of a bygone age. The humans were moving forward, and nothing would stop them. Finally, Tarashk spoke, his voice hoarse. "We will stand with you," he said, his words heavy with the weight of defeat. "We have no choice." Admiral Tyler nodded, the smallest trace of satisfaction on his face. "Good," he said simply. "You've made the right choice." With that, the other ambassadors slowly followed suit. One by one, they spoke the words Tarashk had already uttered. They would stand with humanity. They would accept the new order. There was no other option. And just like that, the galaxy shifted. The power had changed hands, and a new era had begun. Humanity had claimed its place at the top of the galaxy, and nothing would ever be the same again. The ambassadors left the room, their heads down, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that the old ways had been destroyed. They had fought for centuries to protect their empires, their way of life, but now, it all seemed so small, so insignificant. Tarashk walked through the halls of the human flagship, his mind still reeling. The humans had proven their strength, their will. They had shown that they would stop at nothing to take what they wanted. And now, the galaxy would belong to them. He looked out a window, watching as the human fleet floated majestically in space. It was a sight he would never forget. The fleet was massive, its ships shining like stars in the blackness of space. It was a symbol of their power, their ambition, and it was a vision that would haunt the galaxy for generations to come. The new era had begun, and humanity was in control.